So hi everyone, are you interested to find out what I think about the design diaries? If so, stay tuned to find out. Play some music. Okay, so the design and diaries have been out for some time and actually have read them already. Some reasons why I have not commented on them is that so design diary 1. So since you announced Dune Uprising at Gen Con, we've seen a lot of questions and speculations of what it means to be a standalone game. I think this, so my reaction to this is that there was a lot of immediate reaction to, and when I say reaction, it's a very negative reaction to Dune Uprising being a standalone game. Because a lot of people are invested into the base game, invested into Immortality, invested into X, and when you put in that investment of money, you don't want it become obsolete. So I think that's where the pushback came from. However, I think when I come in as more as a hardcore or someone who has played this like maybe a few hundred times, right? It's not so much about the investment, but it's just, we just look at it as something's new that we are going to play, and we're just excited about it. So I understand that there's a lot of pushback from it being a standalone game. That's why I think their wording has changed to a standalone expansion. So overall, I do think it's a good thing. I do think they can do a lot of new things by removing a lot of things. And so let's just talk about it. And I don't want to stress too much about it, but I overall think it's a good thing. You have a lower barrier to entry for new players, and you teach someone the rules of Uprising, and they know all the rules of Dune Imperium itself, and you can play both versions and you can mix and match. I think it'd be great. So Dune Part 2 is released in theaters late 2023. I think it's been pushed back to somewhere early 2024, but I do think that the Uprising will be out first. So player perception of Rise of X has been incredibly positive, and we've been announced Immortality and spot some of its content. Some people question whether it become too complex or too bloated, and I think Direwolf felt confident that Immortality hit its mark, and players seem to agree. So means that Uprising is developed at a point of time, or started development at a point of time when Immortality was announced, shown to people, but it hasn't been played by the public. So it means that probably they have a full year development cycle, so that before Immortality is released, they are already starting work on something new. Okay, so the challenge wasn't going to go away. Dune Part 2 is a new story, and then they want to release a big expansion or to find a way to work with whatever is existing. So what they chose is a path of Clang and expansions. So you just have a new base game, then you can kind of add on the expansions. So they decided to do a new base game, and it felt very thematic as part of the new epic story for Dune. So the situation in Dune is changing, and I think there's a new board. I think this is very exciting for a lot of reasons. It comes up to a very steady development life cycle. So let's say if every movie is out every 3 years, right, means that you have standalone, expansion, standalone, expansion, standalone, expansion, till the death of this movie or till the death of this board game. And for people who are very heavily invested to it, if it continues to build upon itself, and I think that it'll be great. They'll just keep improving itself, and the barrier to entry constantly is lowered, whereas there's a lot of the quality is built upon the foundation of whatever's previous. So here you have a card which is branching paths. So a card from Uprising that captures the spirit of our product development decision. So I think out of all the things that are shown, right, the cards are actually the most telling things about the design aspect of the game. So So let's talk about this card, Branching Paths. It's a Bene Gesserit tag. It costs 3 influence, right? So if you put it side by side with the other 3 influence Benny cards, you have pretty good cards to go against, right? Most of them grant 2 persuasion, have Benny access. So access wise is completely normal, maybe less even, because this is just Bene Gesserit and city access or blue access. The on reveal is nothing great, but it is at the baseline it is good. Like at a 3 persuasion you would buy it because it has flattering access and it reveals for 2, right? But then the on play effect has a tag which says if you have the alliance, you can trash an intrigue card, you gain an intrigue card, and then you gain 2 spice. So you cycle an intrigue card and you get 2 spice. So 2 spice actually is quite a lot, and cycling an intrigue most of the time is good. I think sometimes you don't really want to do it, but most of the time there's an intrigue that you relatively don't like in your hand and you can cycle it. So it almost counts for like 3/4 of an intrigue and 2 spice. So I think there are a lot of things that are on the board with Dune Uprising. So there are a lot of things that are like new. There are like sandworms, and then there are spies, but there are a lot of things that require that I don't think are being shown that will come into play in Dune Uprising. There are a lot of investments that you need to do in order for there to be payoffs. So this is quite in line with I think with Immortality. You know, there's the intrigue card that you know, you get 2 swords. If you have the first genetic marker, you have 4 swords. You have the second genetic marker, you have 6 swords. Right? So then there's a payoff for an investment. And I think it's all similar for all the other genetic markers, right? You invest in the experimentations or research, and then you get a payoff, right? So it's a delayed reward, or whereas the baseline is still decent. So this card kind of speaks to that design philosophy, right? You have a baseline decent card is like its base is okay. You don't hate to put in your deck. It's like slightly better than a liaison or a seeking paths or seeking ways, right? But the being able to get a payoff that requires some investment. So you get alliance, you get something great. So I think we'll come back to this later on. Like you'll see a lot of other cards that if you have a sandworm in combat, then you get this reward. If you have a spy at this place, then maybe you can send your agent and you get this certain effect. If you have there's a Spacing Guild alliance, or you have this 3 influence in Spacing Guild or 3 influence in Fremen, then you get this reward. So there are a lot of things that are on the board that you need 2 influence in this to go to this space, but there are a lot of things that I think will be in the cards that will shape actually Uprising. So whether you have the alliance or 3 influence, and I think a lot of it are point or like just gentle nudges to push people into conflict, right? So let's say if 2 people have these cards that say the word alliance on it, what happens is that these 2 people suddenly become in conflict, whether they want to or not, right? Because the reward, the payoff is very high. So like when 2 people have this card that says Bene Gesserit Alliance, they become in conflict. Or let's say if you have someone who has a Fremen card which says 3 influence, right? Then suddenly no matter whether someone has an alliance or not, going to 3 influence is good for you, even though it might not give you the alliance, right? But it puts pressure on the person who has alliance at 4, right? So you go to 3, you get a benefit, and because your 3 is very near to 4, there's incentive for you as well if you're the person at 3 influence to kind of steal the Fremen alliance, right? So it puts people into conflict that previously they were not in conflict, and it rewards people for getting to that point. So I think this is I think something that I see that is being shown to us, but it's not really talked about. Okay, so let's just get on with it. So in this design diary, they talk about dropping the Mentat. So they have replicated Mentat. They drop the full space card and icon. They load the average complexity of the Imperium cards. So this is relative to the base game. So relative to the base game, actually this is quite surprising because I don't think the base game cards are that complicated. So contracts is modular and replaced by something simpler, so I don't care about this because we'll never be playing the simpler version. So they talk about the new board, and then after that, yeah, after 100 games of base Dune Imperium, more variety of options is a change I appreciate. In Uprising, fragment board spaces necessary going to light up your world on fire, but they do get you on a path to Siege Heber, which is critical location in the base game, and your first visit allows you to get maker hooks, then allow you to call sandworms into battle. So then he's talking about sandworms, how they're going to talk about this separately. And then there are other spaces like shipping is now unlocked with the 2 influence in the Spacing Guild. And then you can get 5 Solari and influence bump for 3 spice, right? So then after that, they talk about Imperial Privilege, which is the new Mentat spot. So so now instead you have to have 2 influence with the Emperor, and you're able to send an agent there to recall an agent from the board and draw a card. So you trash an intrigue, draw an intrigue. So you cycle an intrigue and you draw a card. Then you talked about how it's a nerf to Ilban, which Paul has stated is now players have discovered is one of the more powerful leaders. So thank you, Paul, for watching our content. I know you heard it through maybe one of me, Oski, or Hidden Assets, probably through me. But I feel very hurt by this comment. So thank you. And so there are multiple spaces on the board that require 2 influence now. So previously it's just spacing and fragment. So now there's Emperor as well. So I don't like. I'm a bit okay. I'm not say I don't like this change, but I'm a bit sad that Mentat is gone. One reason I'm sad about it is because I feel that I feel that I was one of the players who realized the value of Mentat a lot, and I've been pushing for it. Right, I've been pushing that it's a good idea to go to Mentat, whether you're playing Ilvan or not. Like if you're playing any of the green leaders, I call them in a lot of my videos. So any leader which has an incentive to go to Mentat, you should probably consider it, and it's a very good alternative to going to fighting for shipping. And so if you watch a lot of my earlier videos, I'm constantly going to Mentat. If you go to BGG, I'm the one on BGG talking about this is why Mentat is good. And I think if you talk to a lot of good players, they will talk about how Mentat is a spot which new players undervalue. And now it's being removed, so don't know. So I guess that because that option for me is taken away, I feel a bit sad, but I'm interested to see how this plays out. It should be powerful. I think if you're putting a higher barrier to entry, making it more expensive, means that, I mean, there's a certain power level that's attached to this that I think is previously not seen, and now they are adding a very big incentive for players to go there to explore the space, right? Because previously, let's say if you're playing for a few times, you cannot grasp the concept of why you're spending 2 Solari to just draw a card and get another agent. Why not I just send my agent to somewhere where it's more contested, right? So by giving some incentive that is not big, right? You cycle an intrigue. I think that players will be incentivized to go there and try it out. So a lot of good things in that aspect, and also I mean when you kind of restrict access to it, also becomes more exclusive and people want to go there. So overall, I'm interested to see how this change plays out. I don't think the power level will be as high. But I think people still go there. You generally need Mentat to save some of your hands at times, and I think it's overall can be very powerful. After that, you have gather support. Gather support is quite interesting to me. So gather support, if you know it takes away the dreadnought space or the base game space that I think you spend some Solari and get some troops. So now they're adding another option that you can spend 0 Solari. So there's another space for you to play your daggers, which is actually one of the things I do like about gather support. There are a lot of opening hands you can get, right? Where you have Dune, dagger, convincing. Alright, and if you're in a late position, someone can go to, let's say, smuggling, someone can go to tech negotiator, then you can go to like Imperial Basin yourself, and then you have to review because you have no other actions to take. And it can feel very bad for new players. So by having an extra green action that people can go to, it might not feel that bad. It might play out very bad still, like you might still end up losing the game because you have a bad opening hand, but emotionally it probably doesn't feel as bad. So I do think that another free green space is a good thing on the board. And I mean, 2 troops, depends on how troop heavy this game is. I'm not too sure. 2 troops is fine, you know, always good to have it. I think based on how combat is going to be, you might not hate it. I think the assembly hall where you get intrigue and get influence probably is better early in the game, but it's always good to have an extra option. So then talk about this Bene Gesserit card called Prepare the Way. If you have 2 influence in Bene Gesserit, you can draw a card. So my thoughts to this is that you know, when you buy Arrakis liaisons in your deck, how often do you want to play a liaison? Most of the time you don't really want to play a liaison. Most of the time you actually want to keep your liaisons, right? Because 2 precision is actually what you want. But I guess having an upside to it is good. I don't think it's game breaking anyway, but I also don't think that you'll go out of your way to build a prepare your way deck, unless there's some layered kinds of equivalent to in Uprising, which I doubt. I don't think they'll print a Bene Gesserit equivalent. Yeah, but okay. So now there are 4 faction tracks, and each of the faction tracks has an incentive for you to get to 2 influence on the board, right? On the board or like at the base level. So this Prepare the Way, I talk about it as on the board. So I think one thing that I suspect will happen early in the meta is that everyone will pick a lane. So one person will go to Emperor, one person will go to Spacing, one person go to Bene Gesserit, one person go to Fremen, right? I think the gravity of it will be towards Fremen. I think combat is a thing that people often misjudge the most. So I think Sandworms is something that people will try because I mean it's so much fun, and because that there'll be a fight for Fremen. But I do think people will more or less like pick a lane, right? 4 players, everyone picks a lane, and everyone gets the associated benefit. So I do think that over time, people will find out what is important to get early and important to get late. So in what we're playing now in Immortality, people will get Spacing early, will get Fremen early. So to get Spacing early because you need interstellar shipping access, you go Fremen early because you want to win combats to get resources for Swordmaster or points, right? So you generally do one or the other. Sometimes people go to Mentat, and if you have no other spaces, you go to Bene Gesserit, right? So that kind of leads into 2 early friendships people have, 2 late friendships people have. I think that eventually the Uprising meta will move to this way, but I think early on it will be quite scattered. So like when people don't know what's the best, people will kind of like go to a clear lane. That's what I think will happen. But overall, interesting to see how this will play out. I think how he talks about how there'll be more alliance battles, I think this is encouraged, not just in what's on the board, but it's what I talked about previously that will be on cards, on intrigue cards or on Imperium Rule cards. So next he talked about a few things about Uprising. So all the leaders are compatible with Uprising. Then the Imperium deck consists of 65 cards, new intrigue deck of 40 cards, and an entire new conflict deck of 16 cards. So then he previews some of the intrigue cards. So Depart from Arrakis is 2 spice, 6 swords equivalent, right? But So it's better than Private Army. And then if you have 3 influence in spacing, so 3 influence in spacing is one of the things that you encourage people to get. You get to draw a card, but if you draw this card, don't draw this card, I don't think it's end of the world. But also, I like that you can spend two spies, get six swords, and this is a plot card, so you can't surprise people with it. So I mean, you give up the element of surprise with some power. Okay, so Shadow Alliance, I think, is one of the things that you can get, and then you can not feel bad whenever you lose an alliance. You can purchase someone, but you don't need to steal it, right? So, but if you steal it, it's always good as well. So, it's one of the cards which I think is good. Like, I don't think it is too broken. I think it being 1 VP is decent. Okay, and then you have tactical option, which is I think slightly different from the base game one. The base game one has 3 swords, so I expect the combat cards to be weaker, right, in general. So if this is the baseline for combat cards, I think combat cards will be weaker, so there'll be more impact on who has more troops or who can deploy more troops. Okay, then you have undercover assets. So this is a Emperor in Spacing tag card that allows you to ignore influence requirements when you send an agent. So I'm not sure how powerful this card will be. It would depend on how powerful getting a spy is. Yeah, I'm not too sure what's the power level in this card, but I do like the card. I think it's interesting. Good Envoy. I'm not sure that this card is mandatory. Right? It probably is, right? So you discard a card. So it's like Good Envoy. You play 2 cards to get good access, but a terrible reveal. So this card is one of the cards I think you kind of need spacing cards for it to work. I think having it in your deck is quite detrimental. Most of the time you don't really want too much faction access. You want some faction access. So I do not know like whether you have played multiple games where you don't trash your Sikh allies, then you kind of draw your Sikh allies and your diplomacy in later turns as well. Then you don't really find the time to play your Sikh allies. I think this can come up a lot with Guild Envoy as well. But I think if you have the spacing cards, I think it's great. Right? Then after you have ecological test station, so you have Fremen and a blue. You spend 2 water to draw 2 cards. 2 water is actually very expensive. But the reveal is like if you have Fremen Bond, you get a water. And 1 persuasion. 1 persuasion actually I think is close to nothing. And I think when you think about water peddler, how often do you want to reveal for water? So you don't really want to just have a card in your deck that reveals for water. And this doesn't always reveal for water as well. So I'm not too sure on the power level of this card. But a lot of cards like might not look good, but I think you have to play with them. I'm not sure if just by going to Fremen you get a lot of water, but I don't think so as well. So I don't really like ecological test station unless you need the Fremen access. Then Long List of Fighters is a card that costs 7, right? So if your deck has 3 or more cards, look at the top 3 cards. So one thing is that if you don't have 3 cards, you can't really play this card. So this card is reveal also is the same as Stilgar, which is a 5 persuasion card in the base game. And draw 1, discard 1, and trash 1 is almost equivalent to drawing 1, trashing 1. So I don't feel like the power level to this card is very high, but I do think that Uprising will feature deck building strategies. I think there'll be a lot of power hidden away in the Imperium deck, and if you are able to use Long Live the Fighters to kind of cull your deck, I think it can be very good. I think there's a Fremen space that allows you to trash as well, right? Trash and put in a troop. So let's say if you go to that space, you draw 1, you discard 1, you trash 2, put in the troop, and after that your deck is down 2 cards and you have cycled a whole rotation. Could be decent. I think because the trash also is optional, right? So let's say you have 3 cards, you can draw one, discard one, and leave one on top as well. Then if you go to the other space that lets you draw a card, you can kind of draw two, discard one. Yeah, so I don't think you'll be happy to buy this at 7. But if you have 7, you definitely will buy it. Yeah, I mean, all the expensive cards are like that, right? If you have the persuasion for it, you'll buy it, but you aren't happy to see long the list of fighters. At least that's how I look at this card. So it's gonna be a long video, guys, so I hope you're paying attention. So let's look at the fragment spaces, right? So the fragment spaces, you can put in a troop and then you can trash a card, or the other one is you can draw a card. So the top one costs water and the bottom one draws your card. I highly suspect that conflicts will give a lot more water. I can't see a world where like the new deep desert space, so replacing the Great Flat, right, now costs 3 water. I can't see a world where that costs so much water and there's less water on the board. I think that there needs to be more water given out, and I think that will be rewarded through combat, I think. But Fragment having a draw is interesting. One thing I noticed on the board is there are a lot less draw spaces. So previously, I knew you have selective breeding and research station. Research station will draw you 3 or 2 depending on if you're playing immortality, and selective breeding will let you trash a card and draw 2. But you look across the board now, right, there's a lot of draw 1s. So either you have to get contracts, or maybe the contract draw 2 is how you draw more cards. But I do think that without draw 2s, it's actually very hard to get Spice Must Slows. Yeah, you kind of need draws on somehow. So either cards need to have draws, or board spaces need to have draws. So until we see more draw mechanics, buying Spice Must Slows might be harder. And if Spice Must Slows are harder, means combat and factions will have more of a significance, right? If combat and factions are more significant, then you have to look at the combat spaces, right? And then that means that I guess Highliner will be more important late in the game, right? And getting water to go to one of the worm spaces will be important. So I think spacing actually should be something that people will fight over late. So in contrast, right, if you talk about immortality, the alliances that, or the factions which people fight over late, right, is they fight over Highliner and they fight over selective breeding. Because one gives you combat points, one gives you Spice of Slow points, or other weird combination of things that you need to do. If you just have good cards, you need to draw them. So selective breeding and Highliner are the most important spots late in the game. Now, unless spies draw you cards, or contracts draw you cards, I think that it's just Highliner, right? Because that is probably the most impactful spot late in the game. Yeah. Let's just look at design diaries too. I think they talk about combat. I think since we have to talk about in entirety, let's just look at that. So Q part, design diary part 2. Dune Imperium Uprising. Design diary 2. Sandworms, Conflict, and the Shield Wall. So I wager most of you are reading this, know that the Dune universe is rich and varied. However, you ask people with passing knowledge of the franchise to name something, majority of them will say giant sandworms. And a stronger, louder presence of worms has been something you asked for since the beginning of Dune Imperium, and that's what we're discussing in today's design article. So we're talking about sandworms. So he asked Paul asked the president of Direwolf, Scott Martins, is how talking about the spy mechanic, and he said his reply was simple. I have one word for you, kid: worms. So the sandworms should look cool. I'm very excited to have them. Maybe I'll even paint them. So sandworms are hard to acquire, but has some limitations. They provide 3 strength in combat and double the combat earned rewards. Okay, so I think 3 strength is like nothing. No one really cares about that. But the fact that they double your combat strength or double your rewards is a massive thing, right? So you immediately think like, okay, if I get 2 points at tier 3, then if I double it, it becomes what, 4 points. So I don't think it'll be that crazy, but let's just read on. So Wonder Worms have a bigger part. Talk about how he designed them to eventually get to this point, and then he tweaked the worms. So landed on introducing maker hooks. So maker hooks are things that you require, like the fragment require to ride the worms, and you get them only by after you have 2 influence with the fragment. So you have fragment friendship. Then after you can go and get these maker hooks. So then talk about at 4 strength they were 4, so then they became 3 strength. So you can't really garrison sandworms as it's not very thematic as well, so they became one for this one combat thing. So let's look at the 2 cards. So Desert Power reveals to summon a sandworm if you maker hooks and spend 1 water. It's one of the limited cards that can summon a surprise sandworm on reveal. And then you have Leadership, which is, you have 2 persuasion, and for each other card that reveals with swords you get 1 more sword. It's like Imperial Bashar costs 4, so this costs 5, right? So so first, like Desert Power, right? If you send an agent to a maker board space this turn and gain 2 additional spies, I don't really care about that. I think it's almost equivalent to carry all, right? You don't really care about Desert Power to play it, but the reveal can help you get 2 persuasion, which is for 6 influence is very bad. Or you can, if you're the maker hooks, you can pay a water to put in a worm. So a worm is 3 swords, right? 3 swords is decent, not incredible, but doubles your combat rewards. So I guess it comes down to how important doubling your combat rewards is. Should be important, right? And then Leadership, for each sandworm you have in this conflict, you can draw a card. It looks like it's fragment access. I'm not sure if there's yellow access to it. Right? So most of the time I don't think you'll have more than 2 worms in combat. Right? So most of the time this will draw you like 1 or 2 cards if you play it. Not you reveal it for a few swords. So I mean, I talked about it earlier in the video, right? When you talked about having people to incentivize do some things to get you a reward. So this sandworm thing is what I'm talking about, right? So if you have a bunch of sandworms in combat, then you can get a certain reward. So overall, it's a good thing. I think it's a good design decision. You push someone in a certain way for them to be rewarded in other ways. So let's just continue talking. So 3 strength and no garrison sandworms are no means a siege to win any given combat. A player with highliner can come over the top of a worm player, but a well-played worm strategy can involve true backups from other board spaces, and then if they win the conflict, they can double the rewards. So then after you have intrigue cards that kind of reward sandworms. So if you have 1 or more sandworms in the combat, you can get additional 2 swords and then trash a card. So 4 swords is ambush based line, which is not incredible but great as well. And inspire awe, you can acquire a card that costs 3 or less. If you have 1 or more sandworms in the conflict, you can put a card into your hand. Maybe it counts for 2 persuasion, or maybe it counts for 2 persuasion or 2 swords. I think decent, nothing incredible, but it makes for very exciting plays as well, I think. So So I think it's very in line with what Paul has been doing since Immortality. You know, you kind of incentivize someone to do something. So they evolved the game board some more. They dropped the grave stats in favor of a new space called Deep Desert. It requires 3 water to harvest 4 spice or summon 2 sandworms. So you probably still get the maker bonus on them, but you choose between 4 spice or sandworms if you have the hooks. So then this will soak up water supplies. So once again, I think that I think combat will reward water. I cannot see a world where it doesn't, because of how expensive the water spaces are on the board. Because of Sandman's ability to double the conflict reward, it's important to note some changes with conflict cards. Second and third places are generally larger than those found in the base Dune. Then the first place rewards are generally worse, but they give you a battle icon, and some conflict cards are protected by the shield wall, so they going through them one at a time. So you can see down here you have the battle icon, then you have the first place reward, and then the second and third place. The first place reward doesn't look incredible as well. If you double it, you get 2 intrigues and a double bump, which sounds okay, but if you don't get it, you get a single bump and intrigue, which is not incredible compared to like the second place. Second place you get intrigue, a spice and a troop, which is pretty good. In third place you get a spice and a troop. The third place actually is pretty decent for what it's at. I mean, compared to, I think, what we're playing now, a lot of tier 2 combats give 1 spice for third place, right? So what are these battle icons? So these battle icons are such that everyone gets a starting battle icon, but whenever you match 2 of them, right, you can convert them to a victory point. I think then in a 4-player game you have only this mouse and this crysknife. In a 3-player game you have a mouse, crysknife, and a ornithopter. So I think people will be fighting over like specific combats. Not sure whether it's a good thing. I feel combat can be quite random at times. I think giving players unweighted incentive for the combat might make combat easier, because a lot of times you go into combat not because of not because you choose to, but because a lot of times it is available to you. There are some combats like the battle for Imperial Basin where okay, how am I going to win this combat? You put in all your resources to it. But there are a lot of mid-game combats that are very, okay, I'm going to a space that is a combat space anyway, I must well just put in some troops. And how many more troops am I putting in than everyone else? So, but it's very rare that, unless you have Swordmaster, so if you have Swordmaster, then how do I say this? You have Swordmaster, then a lot of things changes. Like you can always fight for combat more, but when you have 2 actions, it's very tough to decide the outcome of the battle. Like you often have to bend over backwards to go into combat where you're not suited for. I don't know how this makes sense to you all, but a lot of times early in the game you don't really have a choice whether you can like win this combat. A lot of it is just left up to what the players at the later turns are doing. So then there's a cycle in 3 cards that help you convert your half points. So anytime you win a combat, you can convert one of them into a full point. And I guess most of the times this will equate to half a point because they cover two bases, right? Or question mark. So I guess there are wilds. So the question mark are wilds, right? Okay, no, then there's not. Then I guess it's a bit harder. I guess when you get this, then you want to go into a combat very hard, because then it's almost an instant point. Okay, then there are also a bunch of. Then after that, you have Secure Imperial Basin. I guess this is a tier 2 and this is a tier 3. And then you're not able to deploy worms until you break the shield wall. We'll talk about shield wall later. So tier 2 combat, you can get 2 water for second place and a troop. 2 water actually is quite similar to what it is now. And unless the shield wall is broken, you can't really double it as well. I think as compared to what Imperial Basin is now, right, which is a full point and control, now you have 2 spies and a troop and half a point. I think most of the time if you're fighting for this, you get a full point as well, right? I think if it's early enough, you get it's full point worth. If it matches what you have, it's also considered a full point, because half points are not really anything. Like half points score 0 at the end. 2 water and troop. Surprised that the rewards for second and third are better than what they are now. I think in Imperial Basin, like 2 water and a troop is already 2 water is already very big reward now. Okay. Let's go on. Okay, let's talk about shield wall. So some conflicts represent battles in locations that are protected from storms and worm by the shield wall. Okay, and these conflicts, calling worms in conflict is not allowed unless the shield wall is detonated by a player. So here are 2 combat cards that represent fighting over the Imperial Basin. So you cannot call worms in them based on what's in the bottom right. So if some of the best real estate is left off limits from the 90 sandworms in battle, how do you do it? You use a nuke or a massive explosion. So there's a icon at Cheesable that allows you to break the shield wall. So there's a shield wall token that's placed somewhere here, I think, on the board. And then when you can go to Cheesable to get a water and to remove this token. Okay. Yeah, and then it talks about, I guess, points. So like, let's say you're doubling this Imperial Basin reward, right? So you can get 2 VPs, and then you can spend 8 spies to get another 2 VPs, assuming you win the combat and you have worms. So if you have worms in combat, means that you need to spend some water, and then 8 spies is quite hard to get. I think maybe 4 spies is doable, so maybe it'll give you 3 victory points if you win with a worm, but it's expensive as well. The second and third place spice is mainly geared to highliner. No one really cares about second and third place for tier 3s anyway. So here's my reaction to this design diary. So there are a few things that they talked about. First, I do like how the design is going with regards to rewarding people for doing something that incentivizes a certain play style, right? Or rewards a certain investment. So this invests people getting their makers hooks, and rewards people who invested into getting access to sandworms and to using sandworms. So I do like this design decision. How it will play out in the game, I'm not really sure, because I feel combat is already very random. I do think that with Uprising, combats will play a bigger part than just getting spice and slows, because of how drawing is limited, unless there's something that I'm not seeing. So if combats are more fought over, then let's look at the board. Okay, I need to go back to the previous. Okay, so combat is more fought over. The 2 spaces once again is highliner, 5 troops, and also deep desert, which allows you to put in 2 worms, right? So let's say you have full garrison, highliner gets in 14 swords, 2 worms plus 2 troops gives you 10 swords, right? Then the other spaces on the board that allows you to put in a lot of troops is research station, that allows you to put in 2 troops. So I don't think that. So previously, one thing about highliner that was so strong, right, is that when you go to highliner, like, you can put in 14 strength, and the next tier that you can put in is 8 at Hardy Warriors. So because there's such a big jump right between the two, the person who goes highliner generally wins, and no one really cares about if you can put in just four troops. Most of the time you need to put in 4 troops and have like another 3 troops from flagships or something. Then it becomes scary, or then it becomes very powerful, and then you can threaten the highliner player, especially in base game. I think base game, whoever highliners kind of wins the combat, assuming they have some garrison. So if this is the case, we might see a sword meta. So people in Immortality or Rise of X don't really like to buy swords, because when you buy one sword doesn't really affect combat. If you buy 2 swords also generally doesn't really affect combat. Most time maybe get 2nd or 3rd place, but it doesn't really bring you from 2nd place to 1st place. Well, I think 3 swords is kind of the break point. 3 swords, 4 swords is when it really matters. Like when you review for 3 or 4 swords, then suddenly you can threaten 1st place, right? It's a very substantial jump. So because the spaces on the board might not be more comparative, right? I think combat players will be incentivized to buy sword cards. And if people are buying sword cards, it means people are not buying Spice of Slows. So there are some things I think we need to figure out as well. So you need to figure out how long the game will last. So my data points are based on Immortality. In Immortality, when it first came out, right, because people were unoptimized, the game kept going to round 8, round 9. When the game goes to round 8, round 9, alliances are always stolen. And if alliances are always stolen, right, what people do is that people just march all the way up to 6 influence with one faction. So they go to 6 and then they slowly get their 2s. I think so that's what happens if the meta is very long. So after that, people start to optimize. Once people optimize and people are able to bring the turn count down to 7, right, then other players are not able to steal the alliances. They just don't have the time to do it. So if the game becomes a race to 7 again, then the alliances kind of go back to whoever just gets to 4 at a late alliance. So like let's say round 6, round 7 alliance, right? It's very hard for it to be targeted and stolen. Then so that's how I think factions will play out. So we need to know how long the game lasts. Does the game last longer? Does the game last shorter? If the game still lasts like 7.6 rounds, then I think it'll still be a race. But early on, I don't think people will be very optimized. So early on, I do think people will get at least 5 to 5 or to 6 with factions if they expect the game to last long. If the game lasts long, it does favor combat to some extent, right? Because after you draw, like Spice of Souls do hurt your future draws. And let's say you're trying to buy a Spice of Souls round 5 and the game lasts to round 8, you'll see it twice. So then it'll hurt you 2 times. We'll have to see. But based on what I can see on the board, I do think that there'll be a combat focus early on. And I think leaders that are combat focused probably will have a slight edge. But at the same point of time, because of how the board is set up, right, I think the early combats also will be very different. So early on in base game, right, the first person to go Hardy Warriors generally wins the combat. Generally, like 80-90% of the time, you go Hardy Warriors, you spend your water, you put in 4 troops, you win the combat. In this case, you can't really do that, right? What you have is that someone can always collect water and go to research station and put in 4 troops, right? But if you're talking about someone putting 4 troops, then someone always can double deploy as well. But if you want to double deploy, then the spaces you can double deploy at are Arakeen draws you a card and you puts one troop in, and then you have to go to somewhere else. I guess all the other spaces don't really give you troops, except for the Hardy Warriors equivalent, which you spend a water and you get a troop and trash a card. Yeah, so I'm not so sure exactly what the meta will shape into. I think so currently, so other things I think about this game, right? I think about early objectives. Early objectives now is interstellar shipping, is Swordmaster, and is for resources or deck building, then resources. So let's say if interstellar shipping is taken away, then next you have Swordmaster and deck building, right? I think these are the two early advantages that people will be gunning for. I do not know whether Maker Hooks will be like the next thing that people are fighting over. Probably, right? So let's say you Maker Hooks, and then if you're getting Maker Hooks, what you really want is you want to go to the Haga Basin. You want to go Haga Basin because you can put in a worm for 1 water and double your rewards. Right, so you want that. So the fight over Haga Basin will be big. Then after that, fight over Swordmaster. I do not know whether there are any easy ways to get to 8 Solari now. We'll have to see what contracts or spies do. So from what I can gather, I think there's like the second person or third person who gets Swordmaster probably costs 6 Solari. I think there's a 6 Solari under that. And that's how I think that it will happen. If, let's say you're the second or third or fourth player, it costs 6 Solari. So there's no real incentive for you to be the first one to rush Solari, because it's a lot easier for everyone else, unless there's a very easy way to get to 8 Solari round 2. That doesn't cost a lot. So I do think that people will rush Swordmaster later, right? So or people won't rush Swordmaster. So if that's the case, then it comes down to Maker Hooks versus deck building. And I suspect deck building will have the most important part in the early game. So deck building, generally you want to maximize your convincings, right? You want to maximize your convincings, and to do that you kind of want to draw in, and you probably going to the tech negotiator equivalent spot to convert your dagger into a persuasion probably will be very good. There are a lot of spaces on the board that draw cards, but drawing cards is very random, because most of the time when you go to a draw card space, you have to spend persuasion to draw a card that gives you potentially persuasion. So I'm not too sure about these drawing card spots, but I do think that buying early is important. So I'm not sure if there'll be a Helena equivalent or something, but I do think that the tension early, right, should be between combat and between deck building, which comes to drawing cards or trashing cards, or to just being able to ensure you get a good card into your deck. Unless there's some spies thing that some Imperium cards need that I'm not seeing. So yeah, I'm starting to ramble at this point. All in all, I'm very excited. And I hope that when you just listen to me talk about it, you can understand where I'm coming from, and how I'm thinking about this game from a experienced player's perspective, right? So there are things I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about game length. I'm thinking about which factions you go early, which factions you go late. I'm thinking about early game, what are your priorities. I'm thinking about how the early turns play out in terms of Solari generation, in terms of who puts troops in, and yeah. So contracts and spies, I think, are the biggest things we need to see. I don't see how spies can be a very complicated mechanic. I still think it's probably if there's spy, it's probably like you get Solari if someone goes there, or maybe you can draw a card, or maybe you can infiltrate, or maybe I still think it's resources, some type of resources that if the spy is there, you like so that you can collect some sort of resources. I don't see how it'll be too complicated. Like, yeah, it probably is something simple, but it probably rewards you for having spies. So there are cards, like this card that has Baron sitting on it. I think it's like wheels within wheels, right? So if you have a spy there, then you can go to go to a space with a spy. So yeah, I think maybe unless spies become unless there are a lot of Imperium cards that kind of require spies, maybe this early rush of spies is something I'm not seeing. However, it's very hard to get early spies. Early spies is very hard to come by. I think in base Dune to Immortality, a lot of people have tried collecting spies early, going to selective breeding, but I don't think it pays dividends a lot round 1. Round 2 possibly. Round 2, like assuming you have good cards, is pretty decent to cycle into it. But to do it round 1 actually is very costly because you don't get any maker bonus, and so it's not a round 1 turn. Is it good round 2? I guess it depends on what spies do. If spies are delayed, I'm not sure. If spies are delayed rewards, I'm not sure whether you want to get them late in the game. You probably want to get them early in the game, but spice is so expensive. Maybe early combat rewards into spies would be a good thing. Yeah, but this is my general reaction. I'm very excited for, I guess, how the Imperium cards are going to be designed. I think based on what I see, that is the design philosophy behind it. You know, it encourages you to fight with other players by rewarding you to get in positions that fighting is cheap, right? But there are some things which I don't think will play out how I think people expect. I don't think people will be excited to get to 2 spaces on spacing, or 2 spaces on Emperor, or 2 spaces on Benny. I think it will be a mad Fremen rush. But I'm excited to play the game. I don't know when the next design diary will come out, and I hope that I hope that this was interesting to you. If you want me to comment about the upcoming design diary, and do write it in the comments, and I'll surely will do it at a much quicker rate. But anyway, thanks for spending time to listen to me and hear me talk and ramble. I'm losing my voice already. Need to get some water. But thanks everyone. See you around. Bye.